Welcome to Sako and the Moon. The subject matter for today's episode is going to involve stories that are true and of a personal nature and admittedly kind of dark. Um, your discretion is advised.
Hey there, aspiring horror authors. It's another episode of Sako and the Moon, created by two self-published horror authors. Today, we're talking about finding inspiration in real-life horror stories.
Oh, yeah.
I am Sako Toomey, artist and author, and a bunch of other things, but we'll just mention that I'm self-published 3 times over. I've been working on my craft for decades, and now I'd like to share my skills with you guys.
And I'm the Moon. I'm her friend. I do the things. I'm Dewan L. Hearn. I've put out a book in horror. I do film. I do screenwriting, and we do all the things. We wear the Omni hat, and today's going to be a good one. This is going to be emotional, isn't it?
Hi, Jamie.
Our comment section. I'm not used to the comment section.
I know, it's crazy. Hi, Jenny. Jenny and Jamie. Woot, woot, woot.
So how are you preparing? How are you preparing for this episode?
I was intoxicating myself in hopes that I can separate the emotional from the piece.
Yeah. See, in this episode, we are going to share real life stories of tragedy that we've come across, either from people we know or somewhere in the wherever verse, and we're going to share those. But they're deep stories. I know there's a story that I plan on talking about, and it gets me every time I think about it. But as we do, we get our inspiration for horror from somewhere. So this is that episode. So buckle up.
So, in the before times, I was something of an agoraphobe, which, if you are unaware, an agoraphobe is afraid of open spaces, afraid of crowds. How agoraphobia and claustrophobia can be so very closely connected, which I was both. So if I wasn't at home, then I was uncomfortable, to say the least.
To say the least. Like, how many people got
it was a full-on phobia. It was a full-on phobia. It was not. Yeah, it was not trivial.
And those things are crippling, people. Like that's the thing. Like these aren't just jokes. This will shut a person down.
Yeah, Jenny knows agoraphobia very well. Yeah. So I used to be very paranoid before the meds and stuff like that. To the point where I didn't let myself shed hair anywhere because someone could pick up my hair and use it against me in a witchcraft sort of context. I understand how unreasonable that is, especially now that I am far away from it.
Paranoia is an absolutely weird thing. I don't have that paranoia. I have a wholly different paranoia. I have the strange paranoia that I feel that if I'm invited out somewhere by someone, their plan is to kill me.
That is unreasonable.
It's very unreasonable. I logically know that makes no sense.
No sense whatsoever.
But I can't help the mental process of establishing escape plans and watching out for who's all there. If there's anything that doesn't line up the way I thought it should, then I'm instantly on edge. And it takes
Mhm.
me a while in new spaces to really um, really feel comfortable. And the craziest part is I don't even have enemies like that. Like people people generally like me.
Uh-huh.
But I'm always preparing for someone to try to murder. Maybe it's because I watch too much horror, but I don't think there's a such thing as too much horror. So
Yeah, yeah,
I
it could
protest that.
be influencing uh, that a little bit, I think.
But I think that that leads into kind of what we're talking about today is how you can watch horror, a movie, something like The Strangers, which is completely innocent. The people who are completely innocent, they didn't do anything to deserve it. They were literally were just home. And this is not a spoiler to The Strangers Chapter One that just came out a couple weeks ago. This talks about the 2003 movie. You've had time to watch it. Um, but then it was just a couple. They were home, and these people decided to attack them for that reason. That can really trigger with that. That can mess with people. I didn't want to watch that movie at my own house for years. I eventually did and was paranoid again. But that's how horror can influence a person. But honestly, movies like that are influenced by true life events that have already happened to people. And that's what we're discussing today, how horrific the type of horrific events that can lead to great and amazing horror.
Not just that, but I feel like the reason why people like to read horror is a little bit of trauma bonding with the book. You're kind of trauma bonding with the author a little bit, right? So there is healing that can happen. Uh, uh, you know, if the person is open to healing at the time, of course, and finding uh, I don't want to say similarities, but like um,
A correlation
having
of sorts. Yeah.
correlations, yeah, of um, how someone handles a situation and what's possible.
Yeah. And sometimes that works as a warning. Like, hey, if I get in this situation, it can easily go this route. Or it can be used as sort of a roadmap. It's like, oh, this character went through A, B, and C to get out of the situation. I'm already at A. I can just go to B and C and get out and save myself from the situation before it gets that bad. Horror is one of those things where it deals with so many different emotions all at once. And I think that's one of the reasons why, for those who give it a fair shake, it can it can easily and very quickly become your favorite genre. All of the emotions that are involved in horror. And I
To
think everyone
include
can relate to that.
comedy. Like I feel like comedy and horror go hand in hand in a lot of ways, especially like to relieve the tension so
Mhm.
that the next horrific thing that happens can kind of broadside the
Yeah.
character.
It's used to relieve the tension after a dark spot, and also give you that false sense of security, that lull before the next thing hits you.
Yes, exactly.
Bonus tip: when you're creating horror, that's how you make those parts uh, jump out. Balance the terrifying with the super happy or super funny, joyous things. Make sure there's a good emotional balance for that.
Mhm. Which I did a lot kind of by accident in my first book, now that I think about it. Like every chapter ended in comedy with the cabal.
Mhm.
Um, and I read back now and I'm like, I appreciate this. Like
I did good. Go.
um in that like it it was how I ended the chapters. So the next chapter would be like, okay, we're back to stress. And then um and then something terrible happens, and then they finally escape or subvert the problem, and they joke about it.
It gives the reader a chance to breathe.
Exactly.
Yeah, because you don't want to give the reader or the watcher, because we talk about both the physical book media and movies. You don't want to give the reader or the watcher, the consumer of the horror, just constant stress and anxiety, like not the whole time through.
Well, there are ways to make that work, I think.
There are, but I think of movies like The Descent,
Mm-hmm.
where they opened up with the flashback, the events that killed the husband and daughter, and then you fast forward to like the drive, and everyone's joking, everyone's cool, everything's happy, and then they're having this little party, and everything's great. Then you get into the cave diving, and they go through the small little holes, and the cinematography on this movie is fantastic. If you've never seen The Descent, um, watch the UK ending. Trust me on this one. Um,
Mm.
it's so tight, like going through the small spaces, that the non-claustrophobic will become claustrophobic while watching. It was excellently done. But those are your moments of stress, and then they get into the big wide open spaces. That kind of acts like a visual cue. When there is no space, that's where the tension is, and then the big wide open space becomes your safe haven until there's a threat in that space.
I feel you. Okay, so I have a couple of stories. One that I had a very physical reaction, very emotional reaction to this story. No names were used, but I would like to take a couple minutes and tell this story. When a girl was in second grade, she was invited to her first sleepover. The friend that invited her mentioned that they had to go to church that night, but they could have the sleepover after. The girl was being raised Japanese Buddhist, so she had no frame of reference. She was excited to go. The friend looked so sick when the girl said she'd gotten her parents' permission. They played with My Little Ponies in the foyer of the church that night. Well into their game, the friend's parents and several of the churchgoers came out into the foyer. The girl thought that they were done. The friend scrambled for the front door, dropping her toys, but the adults snatched her up and she screamed. She was taken into one of the rooms. The rest of the adults picked up the girl, filling her with apprehensive fear, and carried her into another room. In the room was a coffin with a well-dressed corpse in it. Too much makeup tried to make the corpse look alive, but it made it look like plastic. The adults shoved the girl into the coffin and slammed the heavy lid shut. The girl screamed and fought and pounded on the lid. Between the darkness, the stench of chemicals, and the tight space allotted, the terror was almost palpable. She felt the tilt of the coffin as it was picked up, and she knew she was being carried somewhere. The air grew thin, so she saved her breath. There was a jarring thump as the coffin must have dropped. Something was thrown onto the lid, and it sounded like dirt. She couldn't help herself. She screamed anyway. Just as she began to black out, the dirt was disturbed as it was wiped off, and a crowbar entered the wooden capsule. The lid was lifted open. She gasped. Her rescuer was her friend's father. Did your family save you? No. We're your family now. The girls were taken to his house for their sleepover. Foot to head, they slept in the same bed, and they were dead silent for the rest of the night. They never spoke of it again.
That's deep. That there's a correlation only very very vaguely to a story that I've written where where at the end of it the people were being buried alive. Like that buried alive uh trope, for lack of other term. Uh
Mhm.
it's so popular, but it can't be overdone because I think there's such a real life fear, like in the idea that you are incapacitated and you find yourself contained, whether it's in a closet, in a room, um, or in an actual coffin. What was that movie that had what was it? Ryan Reynolds in it?
Oh,
The whole thing.
Amityville?
No. He was in a coffin. He was in the whole thing takes place in a coffin, and it's just him
Oh,
with a
I
light.
wouldn't watch. I
Um,
wouldn't watch
there's,
that.
there's a weird genre because there's other movies like Phone Booth, where things take place in such um, a small space, and that isolates the setting,
Mhm.
and that makes everything so much more significant surrounding it. And exactly, like it's such like people are genuinely fearful of being buried alive, and 99 people out of 100 would never have to worry about this. I could probably say 99 people out of a million would never have to worry about being buried alive. But the fact that it happened to someone means it could always happen to you, and that's the kind of inspiration that leads to. I want to say the movie's called Buried, but movies like Buried, where the guy's in possibly Buried, where the guy is in uh, a coffin by himself the whole time trying to get out. It features in Kill Bill Volume 2, where there's a few scenes where she was buried alive and she had to try to do the 1 inch punch to work her way out. Um, there in my story, Jacob in the Copperweed collection, someone's buried alive. Uh, these kinds of movies where a person is put in a space of isolation, desperately trying to be saved. The book Room is not a horror, although it probably should be.
It probably should be.
It probably should be. If you've never you can watch. I know everyone says this. You can watch Room. It was done really well with Brie Larson. Um, read the book. The book is so much more
Oh, okay.
powerful because
Mhm.
you watch the movie and you see the whole movie as it is, but the book is told from the son's perspective.
Mhm.
And the son is younger than the someone's knocking on my door. I'll be back.
Okay. Yeah. So, I also have a couple of comments here. So, Jenny said being buried alive is a major fear of hers. She wants to be cremated, but also afraid of waking up in the oven. So, lose mental situation. Yeah. Jamie was like, damn. And hello, Felicia. Welcome to our real horror story episode. You just missed a whopper. Oh, I hope you don't mind if I stretch for a moment. I've been sitting all morning.
I love doing shows live. That's great.
They do the things. Ooh.
But yeah, that's a great trope to. I don't even know where we are at this point. But yeah, that was a great trope to use when you are wanting to create isolation, find an isolated space, like in Room. Like I was saying, like Room is told from the kid's perspective, and he is younger than she's been captive. So
I
they
think
do.
it's I think what makes being buried alive so powerful is the lack of control, right? There's no way to control a situation where you are being buried alive. The best that you can do is attempt to escape before air runs out, but that isn't promised.
No, and even if you do, and you also know that once you've been buried alive, if you make it out of the first room, which is the box, you now have to contend with an unknown amount of dirt immediately hitting you the moment you create an opening.
Right.
So you are then desperate against the clock. And, the clock is like the most important part of writing mystery, thriller, or in our case, horror. It's the clock is your best friend. Things happening within the space of a night, or things have to go before the morning. Was it Ready or Not? The movie Ready or Not, where the bride marries into the rich family and they have to play a game, and she is now forced to play a hide and seek, and she has to stay hidden and not be captured before morning. It's
Mm.
that clock. Everyone's working against the clock. In Saw, there's always a clock. There's always a timer. Do this within this amount of time, or this will happen. And
Well,
so
it
you're
ups
fighting
the
the clock.
stakes, right?
Yeah.
It ups the stakes. So I feel like putting a clock on a what would otherwise be inconsequential. What the idea is, what would happen once the timer expires?
Right.
Right? It's the terror that, like, what happens when the buzzer goes off?
Right. Right. It's like, this is a bad enough situation, but this situation is bad. In 30 seconds or in 3 hours, it's going to be even worse. So it's
Right.
how
That's
suffer here or suffer there.
exactly. And that concept of taking away agency, taking away power, is one of my tactics for basically taking the what am I trying to say? So my thoughts are like
You gotta snap. You gotta snap. You gotta keep yourself in line.
gotta snap. Um, what's the worst thing that can happen to this character in this moment?
Right.
That is, whenever I hit a wall, if things seem to be going too good, I ask, what is the worst possible thing that could happen to this character in this moment? And that moves the story forward
Every
in a
single time.
way. It catapults the story, almost like a second inciting incident in a way.
Kind of, yeah. A lot of the ideas that I end up having come from my everyday. It's one of those things where I go driving down the street and an accident happens behind me, and I think, what would have happened if I couldn't find my shoes? What would have happened if I had used the restroom before I left?
Yeah,
And I was 1 minute behind myself in the schedule, in my timing. But that accident would have been me. I always think about, like, what is happening in real life and what would have happened if this was the direction I went.
yeah.
And that's where I get a lot of the inspiration I get for my ideas.
How can this go wrong?
Right.
Like, I relate in that, like, you basically want to
Live shows.
Live shows. What was I saying?
See, I knew exactly what you were saying until you asked me.
Yeah.
That's how my brain works. We were talking about how things go wrong.
Oh, right. Alternate timelines, right? So, like, it's the what could have been.
Yeah.
It's how close did you miss that particular obstacle, or vice versa in the future, like what will happen when you go through that obstacle, and what are the consequences for the buzzer going off, as it were.
Yeah. It's like what could happen,
What
what
could
would have
happen
happened. It's the shoulda, woulda, couldas that can
are
actually lead
applicable.
towards.
Yeah.
They can lead to some really good creative ideas. Um, Not horror, but Back to the Future. The whole entire series is life was fine, not great for the McFlys, but you know it was fine. But
Right.
Marty goes back in time and impacts something, and then realizes, oh, I've changed everything. I've made things horrible. Part two is an even bigger factor in that because Biff becomes rich and destroys Hill Valley, and they realize we have to we have to turn around and fix things because your father's dead and I'm institutionalized and Biff is destroying the entire place. The school's closed down. We have to fix this. This was on us. And and right there's the other comment that says this is giving me story ideas.
Mm-hmm.
The exact point of this episode. These
Yeah.
real life concepts, these real life ideas, these real life interactions lead to ideas and lead to horror. All right, go back to Jenny's. All right.
Okay, so intrusive thoughts would make a great horror story. And it's not so much the thoughts that are the problem, it's acting on them. And what's the worst that can happen upon acting on intrusive thoughts?
And to counter that or to complement that, it's if you try to not so much manifest the intrusive thoughts, but I'm trying to think of what word I'm trying to use here. Um, if you kind of like personify them into an entity, Martyrs is a great example. Martyrs, I love Martyrs, the original, not the remake. Um, Martyrs is really like two movies in one. And if you're looking at the first half of things, uh, the she is traumatized by the events of her capture when she was a child, and those intrusive thoughts have kind of manifest themselves into this psychosomatic creature, which is uh, really just it's really her. In her perspective, there's a monster attacking her. In reality, it's her attacking herself. It's sort of like a like a manifestation of intrusive thoughts. So you can do it by actually having someone act upon intrusive thoughts or having the voice inside my head, and or you can manifest it in some other creative unique way. And again, all of these, who doesn't have intrusive thoughts, who hasn't been walking down the street holding their phone and then just had the thought, throw your phone on the ground, just like slam it.
I saw a meme today that was basically a shadow monster creeping into a child's room. And there are cookies and a note that says, for like milk and cookies. And it says, for the sleep paralysis demon. And the next frame is the sleep paralysis demon, like consuming cookies rather than, bestowing sleep paralysis upon the poor child.
And sleep paralysis is one of those really weird things that people, surprising how many people don't realize that sleep paralysis is a thing. Like there's a part of your brain that literally shuts off your body's movements
Mm-hmm.
while you sleep and dream. And this is so that when you run in your dreams, when you walk in your dreams, swing your arm in your dream, your body doesn't physically move. And it's just a thing that your brain does. but it's supposed to work when you're asleep. And there are occasions where you can wake up before the paralysis wears off, and you wake up and you physically can't move. You can't move your legs, you can't move your arms, you're frozen in place, and you don't if you don't know what this is, it has to be the most terrifying thing that ever happened to you in real life. I
Right.
remember the first time I dealt with sleep paralysis, and I woke up with it, and I'm like, I didn't understand what was happening to me. Like, all of a sudden your body doesn't work and you don't know what it is. Can you imagine if someone um,
Sitting on your chest
or
or
induced this to you on purpose, found a way to induce this paralysis to you, and then things were happening around you? Anything from like an attack to a robbery to a fire, and you can't move to escape, nor can you open your mouth to say, "Hey, someone help me." The fear, the terror in that individual moment. And people deal with sleep paralysis literally every night.
Yep.
That's
There are
borderline horror.
medieval paintings. There are medieval paintings of sleep paralysis demons sleeping on a person's chest and
One of those things.
preventing them from moving.
It's one of those things that are literally as old as time, and
Mhm, mhm.
and again, people sleep roughly every night, and this is this is a thing that your body does every night. So you can wake up with that sleep paralysis tonight. It could happen
Yeah,
to you tonight. You can wake up tomorrow morning and not be able to move a single body part in any way, shape, or form, and you won't know what to do with yourself.
yeah.
Except for write about it when you get your arm back.
So I have I wasn't gonna do this until later, but I'm itching to talk about it a little bit. In
Okay.
the early 19th century, the Bell family of Adams, Tennessee experienced one of the most famous hauntings in American history. The disturbances began in 1817 with strange noises such as knocking and scratching and escalated to physical attacks on the family members. The entity, which became known as the Bell Witch, targeted John Bell and his daughter Betsy the most. The witch's identity and motives remain a mystery, but she allegedly foretold John's death, which occurred in 1820. Even President Andrew Jackson reportedly visited the Bell home and experienced the supernatural occurrences firsthand. I think so the thing that makes Japanese horror stand out is you rarely get the motive,
And
especially
in some cases, there isn't one. It's
in
just
most
happening.
cases, there isn't one. Exactly. Or there is, they just don't tell the viewer in any way.
Yeah. There
So,
is. There's usually a circumstance. It's more of a circumstance than a motive.
mhm.
The two bigger examples of your Japanese horror, obviously Ju-on and Ringu. And for Ringu, it's just you watched the tape. You just found the tape and watched it. That's the only thing you were guilty of being bored. That's that's what you were guilty of. You're guilty of being bored. For Ju-on, which is The Grudge, you walked into a house. If you stepped into that house, that was it. It was game over for you. You
Game
were you
over.
were you were marked. And um, there was a Grudge and a Grudge 2. We're not talking about the remake. Don't get me started on that one. But there was a Grudge 3 that went straight to DVD. That's, I know the straight to DVD sequels. That one was actually pretty decent. It
I
it
feel like
started off. It starts off where where Grudge 2 left off, and I appreciate them starting off from there. It's
mhm,
obviously a straight to DVD sequel, so falls into a category in its own right. But for a straight to DVD sequel, I actually appreciated that one. I like that one.
That's interesting. Ju-on, I felt like is a perfect example of the having no clue as to who the I mean, it was evident that the father of the family had possibly, something had happened in the family, and the father was the predominant antagonist,
Yeah,
right? Though the hint that something was happening was the son.
yeah.
So,
So yeah, so I remember how that exact story went down. It was it was a mother, father, and son. The mother had a crush on a professor. She was kind of obsessed with him, kind of loved him, and the father found the little notebook where she had wrote little hearts and such, and he got angry, he got jealous, and he attacked the mother, and then subsequently attacked the son. And since this is me talking, everything comes back to wrestling. That's disturbing, um, for wrestling fans, because that, not exactly for those reasons, but that happened in professional wrestling. Not a storyline. It was a real life thing. It was the Chris Benoit story. It's the name we
oh,
don't. It's the name we don't talk about in wrestling, but this is the reason why, because of this real life tragedy.
mhm,
Concussion, for whatever excuses and reasons that they had that weekend. Um, he attacked his wife. He attacked his son, and he, you know, offed himself. And it's one of those real life scenarios that mirrors fiction. He didn't do it because of the grudge. Let's not correlate the two. Outside of a father was responsible for the death of mother and son, those are the only correlations. Let's not connect those two in any other way or regular reasons. But you can't ignore how fiction and reality mirrored, and while that may not have been a direct influence from one to the other, that similarity to real life is, again, it's kind of what this episode is all about. These real life tragic and horrible situations can easily be twist, turned, modified, and manipulated into fantastic works of fiction.
absolutely. So Jenny notes that mother is a great one for the walk into the house and you are marked. So the children became hers the second they walked in.
See, I have to find that mother, because the only other mother I know is the Jennifer Lawrence mother,
Ah,
which is a different movie. This is clearly a different
different
movie.
movie. Different movie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but for the record, that movie is a clusterfuck, and I love it because it's a clusterfuck. So if you need a movie recommendation and you just need a what the fuck kind of movie, Mother with lowercase letters, with Jennifer Lawrence, great movie, and Michelle Pfeiffer. Who doesn't love Michelle Pfeiffer?
Who doesn't love Michelle Pfeiffer? Jamie learned about the Bell Witch from King Diamond. He did an album on the story. Where are my King Diamond fans? Horror and metal. Yeah, they go hand in hand.
So
Absolutely.
does horror and wrestling. It does. Like, I was just talking to John Cosper last week on my other show, and that was one of the things we started off talking about, is this weird correlation between wrestling and horror. I do both a horror and wrestling podcast. He writes both wrestling biographies and books of horror. There are horror characters in wrestling like the Undertaker, Kane, the Boogeyman. There's literally a monster in it called the Boogeyman who ate worms, real worms, on his way to the ring. There's Bray Wyatt, the Fiend. There was all these crazy horror elements in wrestling. They go together just as well as horror and metal, because I also love metal as well.
Because metal
Fantastic.
is
I'm gonna do a
awesome.
metal podcast here soon. I guarantee you.
Mhm.
That's what's next.
So the second story I have is Russian in origin. In 1922, the Gruber family, living on a secluded farm in Hinterkaifeck, Germany, was brutally murdered. The strange events began months before the killings, and with the discovery of footprints in the snow leading to the house but none leading away, and mysterious noises coming from the attic. On March 31st, 1922, all 6 members of the family, including their maid, were killed with a mattock. What's a mattock?
How's it spelled?
The bodies were discovered days later, stacked in the barn. Despite
How's Maddox spelled?
Mattock.
Okay. It is. It's one of these. Hold on.
Clarinet?
Like an axe. It's like an axe.
It's like an axe. You need to turn down the brightness. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so it's like a pickaxe.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the mattock. All right. High tech on this show.
Despite numerous investigations and theories, the perpetrator was never found, and the case remains one of Germany's most chilling unsolved murders. Murdered by a ghost.
Unsolved mysteries used to scare the hell out of me.
Yeah.
It was mostly the theme song, more than anything else. It's also that concept that strange things happen to people every day.
Yeah, stranger than fiction.
Yeah, and that's the real thing, man. And that it creates some of the best media. I mean, like I said, Unsolved Mysteries as a TV show was a fantastic show. Probably still is. They brought that back.
They did.
But horror television, horror movies, more and more horror books are all. It all takes that regular normality and shifts them.
I hope that's the case. I have been disappointed by books in the past 3 years, and I'm on the hunt for horror books that are a little more spoopy, I guess, a little more emotionally stirring.
My favorite horror book, I think probably my favorite horror book is Afraid by Jack Kilborn.
Okay.
And so picture this concept. You have these military super soldiers, right?
Sure.
And the people they use for these mental enhancements to create the super soldiers are former serial killers who are on death row. Now, the point of these super soldiers was to take them. They're serial killers, so they're already deranged. They've had their brain fucked with technology, and you're supposed to take them and drop them behind enemy lines and just let them
go to town.
Go to town, right? With as much brutality as they can muster within themselves. So imagine those types of soldiers being dropped off in little bitty town in I think it actually was Minnesota. Sorry, Jenny. It was in Minnesota. And so there's a small town, one road in, one road out, and this is where you drop them off. And you're telling the story of the people in this little town who are barely dealing with traffic violations, let alone murderous super soldiers.
Yeah.
I love that book. It's beyond belief. I don't believe that the government's really making these super soldiers. The government's not that smart.
Right.
But at the same time, can you imagine what would happen if you are suddenly confronted in your happy dappy life with a terror far beyond your imagination? You've never had to experience something like that. And the craziest, most brutal thing is just suddenly dropped off literally in this old couple's backyard.
Yeah.
mind blowing. And those are the kind of things that really impact that real to life scariness. It's like your life is pretty mundane, pretty normal, and all of a sudden tragedy hits in a manner you never would have thought of actually happening to you. It kind of leads into the story I'm going to tell.
All right, let's hear it.
So I actually reached out to the people who were involved in the story and got their permission to tell it. Again, I'm not using names, so I'm going to go. Well, I could probably tell a story without a husband, wife, and we'll call it sister. All right.
Okay.
Husband, wife, and sister. And the sister is related to the wife.
Okay.
So we understand the connections.
The relation, yeah.
So life happens, and the husband and wife move in with the sister, right? And the sister works third shift. She has a very physical job, so it's very physically demanding, but not a typical job for a woman. She works that job third shift, and they kind of live together, but they are, they have their own lives that they deal with. They realized that they hadn't talked to the sister in about a day or so, which isn't so strange because of the work shift. She works late at night, and so she'll sleep during the day. They're obviously up during the day, and they sleep at night. So they miss each other pretty often. But they realize that time has passed, and they haven't really talked to sister. So the wife goes to knock on the door and check on sister, only to find out that sister is dead. And she's been dead in this room for at least a day or so. Blood on the walls. Naturally, this is instantly traumatizing. And when the police are called, they are the ones who are initially subject to, I guess not subject to arrest per se, but they're under investigation because they've been in the house with this body for a while, unknowingly. Turned out that this was an ex-boyfriend of the sister who handmade a gun and a silencer, and in a fit of jealousy murdered the sister in the house where her child was, the couple, and their child was. You can imagine just waking up to such tragedy and you're having your life completely flipped instantly. And that story impacted me so much when I learned about it. It still impacts me like 2 years later. It's one of those things where you see tragedy coming and you try to do everything in your power to avoid it. Still comes. To correlate it to horror, think Final Destination. You see an incident coming and you try your best to avoid tragedy, but it's coming for you no matter what. And that is, again, not a direct correlation, but that's how you can take a story so dark, so tragic, and turn it into something fictional but still impactful. And if you don't think Final Destination is impactful, drive down the highway and see a log truck and count how many cars are behind it. You might find one, maybe. You won't find me. That's for damn sure. I'll be 20 feet back in the whole other lane. I might well just take the other route. I might just not even go the same route as that truck. You're not going to see anyone who's seen Final Destination 2. Let's clarify. This is in Final Destination 2, not 1 and 2. You're not going to find our generation behind log trucks. And that's the reason why. I think I posted a meme the other day where it was a log from a log truck that had actually slipped and crashed into the windshield of the car behind it. And the little caption was like, see?
Yeah.
And that's all we had to say. But at the same time, that's one of those real life can be darker than fiction at times. It's like no matter what, despite the situation that woman was in, how happy her life was, things were going great. She saw something bad and left it and avoided it, but somebody had different plans. And
It's not just that. It's not just that. I feel like the story you told has a little extra horror bit because time had passed into like bloating land, basically. So it would be traumatic just to see the sight, just to
right.
see the body. And what if it's been a week? What if it's been 2 weeks? Like, what does that mean for the body? And what does that mean for the effect that it has on the person who sees it?
And you could take that
Especially if it's
story,
someone they care about.
and it's one of those. When you said that, it reminded me of the movie Urban Legend, a movie that I love for many different reasons. Um, in Urban Legend, you have someone's going on vacation for the weekend, and they're killed right at the beginning of the weekend, so no one's even looking for them.
Mm-hmm.
So what if it's a kidnapping? What if it's a murder? And then no one's expecting you to be there anyway, so you're
Mm-hmm.
just left there.
Right. Still
Great.
never like driving behind log trucks. Yeah,
That's the
for
point.
obvious reasons.
That's the impact.
For obvious reasons. And it's less because of the movie and just more because of common sense. Like,
Well, at the same time, people, they are professionals, and there are ways of stacking the logs to where they kind of interlock with themselves and each other to prevent rolling off, and to create, for lack of a better term, a seal to keep them in place. I mean, if you put them on in stacks and rows, no, that's not going to work. But if you like pyramid them,
mm-hmm,
then as they start to slip and roll, they'll fall into each other. And if you have the base secure, they're going to be secure. I have full faith that 99 out of 100 of these trucks are secure and logically considered when they were loaded. But I can tell you 1,000% of the time, I'm not going to be behind that truck. It's not
yeah,
happening.
yeah, it's
It's going to be
ridiculous.
like a good quarter mile between me and that truck. If some car wants to get in front of me, they're more than welcome. Let that log hit your car, not mine.
Okay, so I read the German story. I read the Tennessee story. How about a Russian story?
I'm not
So, in 1959, 9 experienced hikers led by Igor Dyatlov set out on an expedition in the Ural Mountains of Russia. On the night of February 1st, something caused the group to flee their tent in a state of undress despite the freezing temperatures. Their bodies were found scattered around the campsite, some with severe injuries, including skull fractures and chest trauma that could not be easily explained. Some of the bodies were found with high levels of radiation. Ooh. The official Soviet investigation concluded that an unknown compelling force caused their deaths. The incident has spawned numerous theories, from avalanches to secret military experiments, but no definitive explanation has ever been confirmed.
And I know how that story, I believe it's that story. I have to double check with her. But I know for a fact that has influenced a horror novel because I've read it and I've met the author.
Oh,
Uh,
cool.
Jenny Kiefer from Louisville, Kentucky. She's the owner and operator of a horror bookstore here in Louisville, Kentucky called Butcher Cabin Books.
Right.
And she's an author now. She debuted her first novel called This Wretched Valley, and that was an influence in her writing that story. It's about people who are traveling. They're hikers and mountain climbers. They're mountain climbers, and so they're trying to do this. They found a cliff that no one else has had marked, and they're trying to discover it. And spooky things happen to them at their base camp, and it gets crazy from there. I clearly won't spoil it because I don't want to get beat up by her. But you should absolutely buy it. And if you're going to buy it from Butcher Cabin because, I mean, if you're going to support her twice.
Yeah.
And we support local and independence.
Absolutely. Do we have any more stories that we want to tell, or are we ready to wrap up?
I think we can probably wrap up. The only other story I had in my head, it's short. It's not really a story. It's more of a report. It just had to do with, a mother's struggle to help her daughter get out of a bad situation, and the daughter tried her best to do it on her own, and she was, again, life was going well, and then tragedy hits, and that was influenced by someone really close to me. Like, the daughter in question was someone I knew personally. I've talked to this young woman. I knew this young woman. I knew the mother in question, and I felt that impact, the anger that comes from the survivors who see the situation from the outside and the aftermath. Don't ignore what revenge can be in a story. That's what I was going to bring it back, because you can have this tragedy take place, but the passion, the energy, the drive in a character seeking revenge for something that was wrong, that has wronged them, like that power, that's an angle we haven't really discussed. It's that revenge angle. You want to give a character instant motivation, like just off top motivation without having to build to it.
Revenge.
It's right there.
They say it's best served cold, but I don't know. I like mine piping hot. All right.
I'm not Klingon, so it's cool though.
If you liked this video at any point, I encourage you to hit the like button. And if you want to see more streams like this one, you can usually find us at 2 o'clock on Fridays. Yes. Where we will continue talking about horror and how we can become better at the craft. If you haven't subscribed, you may want to, and you may want to ring the bell just on the off chance that YouTube actually notifies you when we go live. And we will catch you guys on the flip side.